Welcome, I'm Ramin and this is Anna, and together we built a camper van for us to travel in with our dogs. Join us in the process of converting this into this. The first time one of our dogs was in the van was when we went to pick up a Christmas tree that we were given permission to cut off of Anna's uncle's property. So we took the oldest member of our pack at the time, Toppy, loaded him up in the van, loaded up a chainsaw, drove there, cut down the tree, put the tree in the very, very big empty cargo area of the van and drove home. From this, of course, you can understand that it was December in Finland, which means it's cold, it's snowy, when we got the van. So building out the van in our yard at that point of time was not an option. Luckily, I work as a part-time firefighter at our local fire department, and we can use the fire station's washing hall to work on our own vehicles. And especially then when I was on call during the weekends, it meant that I had one of the fire department vehicles in our yard, which meant that we could have our van in the station for the whole weekend, which meant that it was in a warm space for a weekend and we could work on it. And then especially once we had Noor and we could take some measurements, because at the time we couldn't find decent measurements of the area that was usable for a build out in the rear part of a jumbo transit. Once we had Noor, we took the basic measurements ourselves and then started making a 3D model of our layout in SketchUp. And this is what our final design at that point of time, before we started the build, looked like. We had a raised floor on which we could use to store things under it. Then on top of the raised floor we had some cabinets on both sides, water storage, batteries, electrical panels, all of this kind of stuff. And then what most people call the garage, but what we designed as a place where we can have the dogs in a more limited area during travel or while we're on the road. And on top of all of this would be our own bed, which we wanted to build with a pull-out system so that we could basically push it together and get a bit more space. Also, the Finnish law has specifications on how much airspace has to be from the top of the mattress to the ceiling, and that's 50 centimeters, which we managed to have with this. And the area and the headspace that the dogs have, or what's above the raised floor and below our bed, is about a meter, so there's enough space for the dogs to be in. Then coming forward from that, we designed that we would have a bench under which we would store our composting toilet and our refrigerator, and then there would be the sliding door on the passenger side, and then on the other side there would be a small set of cabinets, basically our kitchen area, and then we would build a bulkhead with a door opening into the cabin. The reason why we didn't go for an open front end but decided to build a bulkhead is that we wanted to be able to regulate the temperature in the living area with more control. The bulkhead is insulated, and from now, with our experiences of using the van for 3 years, it has worked extremely well, both in the summer heat and in the winter cold. Now we had the design of our van ready. We had our van, but everyone knows a camper van has to have a name. I mean, how can you be van lifers if your van does not have a name? And of course, we've always named our cars also, so for us it was a no-brainer to give our van a name. And we wanted the van's name to have some kind of connection to our yellow flatcoat Luca, who loved being in the car, loved traveling in the car. And because Luca comes from, well, the Latin lucus, which means light, we then started thinking, how could we incorporate the term light in our van? And then I came up with the fact that Nur in Persian, or Farsi, means light. And thus the name Nur is a very good way of both combining the legacy of Luca with my Persian heritage. We got started with the whole process of stripping the interior, cleaning out what rust there was in the van and all of that. And we were progressing quite well. until our daily driver, our SUV, blew its engine. What this meant was that now we were at the point where we didn't have any other car except our van, and that meant that we couldn't keep our van standing in the station for long periods of time, and also we couldn't really start making a lot of holes, etc. in it during this phase. So our build was delayed pretty much by at least a couple of months, maybe even 3, in which we couldn't do much while we were waiting for a replacement engine, or looking for a replacement engine for our SUV, waiting for it to arrive from England, waiting for it to be installed and all of that. And of course all of this meant that we were spending a lot of the cash that we had put aside to spend on buying various things that we needed for the camper van into the engine and the work that was required to get our SUV up and running again. We got our SUV back in the end of April or so, and at the same time then the weather started getting warm enough that we could start working on Nord in our own yard and didn't have to rely on evenings and weekends when we could have it at the fire station. So now the build process really started, and we started out, of course, by putting in insulation in the walls, doing some electrical work, and then slowly starting to build out the interior. YouTube is full of very good van build videos, and since we didn't really film our van build in a very organized manner, there's lots of parts of the process that are completely missing that we didn't film at all. We might have taken a picture or two and such. I'll leave you with this fairly quick montage of our summer of building the van and going through the various parts of the build. Once we got the basic structure of the bed frame, the raised floor, the kitchen cabinets and all of these in place, it was time to start focusing a bit more on decorating. And Anna wanted our van to be our summer cabin, and summer cabins in this area, especially the older ones, have a certain kind of a feel and vibe to them, and Anna wanted to capture this Karelian cabin, small house feeling in the decoration of our van. So our kitchen backsplash is made out of tiles that Anna designed and created herself with these Karelian patterns, traditional Karelian patterns in them. We have moldings made out of very old wood that was taken from Anna's great-grandparents' old barn. Our kitchen cabinet knobs are made out of hay poles from Anna's family farm, which has been in her family for over 100 years. What we wanted for the interior was, although it has light white walls with this more modern Nordic approach, and also which is useful for a very small space, there is a lot of also dark wood, which with traditional Karelian patterns and a lot of old and repurposed wood that we've used. Finally, in August of 2019, we were at the point where we took the van to be MOT'd as a camper van and not a van anymore. We passed with flying colors, and then it was time to do our first test drives. Our first test drive was to Patvinsuo National Park, just an extended weekend trip. It was a rainy weekend and we got to the national park late, started to make our first set of tea on our induction stove and blew the main fuse of our van. We'd done the calculations correctly for what was supposed to be a slow fuse, so it would have been able to handle the spike load of starting up the induction hob. But for some reason, this slow fuse wasn't a slow reacting fuse, but it was a fast fuse, so it kept blowing whenever we tried to use the induction hob at full power. We managed to finally get enough hot water that we got our tea, but then in the morning we didn't get our morning coffee made, which was a bit of a challenge, and had to drive out of the national park to the nearest gas station to get some coffee and all of that. But our test drive was successful. We found some bugs. We came back home, we started fixing them. Basically meant that I had to do some rewiring in the electrics, test up what size of a fuse do we really need for the main fuse so that it can really handle the load of the induction hob going at full power. And then we set out the next weekend for our next test drive. And this one we did via Kuopio and the nearest IKEA, in which we got some more supplies for the van. We went to a nice little beach, and again it was rainy, it was August. I managed to go for a swim, we had a nice walk with the dogs. This time the induction hob worked perfectly well. But then we noticed the challenge that the Primus gas stove that we bought so that we could make food outside was incompatible with pretty much all of the gas bottles that you can buy in Finland. So after this, the next phase was, okay, find a way to get it to work with gas bottles that are available in Finland. Luckily, that was also solved after quite a bit of calling around and Googling and now we were ready for our real test drive, Noor's maiden voyage, our planned trip around the Baltic Sea.